I got my cookies. Put the cookie in my mouth. I got my cookies. They want to make me shout. I got my cookies. Yeah. Housing video. I got my cookies. Whoa. Here we go. That's from the Mr. Bucket commercial. I never had Mr. Bucket, but I like the commercial. The last video I explained why I don't think someone, especially someone young, should buy property in San Jose for primary residence right now. I think they should rent for cheaper. And I realized after I made that video, which was kind of haphazard, that I hadn't kind of given a broader context and overview for my thoughts on housing, which are substantially different than what you're going to hear from a lot of other people, especially people involved in the home selling process. So I thought it would be a good time for me to just outline a lot of my thoughts about it because, you know, I love the debt video because that's one of the most painful, challenging parts of the whole process. My second favorite topic maybe, or maybe even my favorite, not sure, is housing. Why? Because debt is painful and paying it back has a great feeling of triumph. Housing can make you really wealthy, but in ways that are way different than what you're usually told and ways that you won't suspect until you read more into it. So I'm going to talk about that in this video. I could probably write a whole book about it. It excites me to no end. All right, so I've just listed some stuff out here. It's not in the best order, but I hope that you're going to get a lot from this information dump. Number one, your primary residence is not an investment. It is insurance. Your primary residence is not investment. It is insurance. I cannot stress this enough, and this is what a lot of people get wrong. This is what a lot of realtors get wrong. They'll tell you a house is a great investment. It's not a great investment. I'm going to show you why. One reason why, so when I say insurance, what I mean is that you are paying money for this home in order to avoid long-term rent increases and guarantee like a fixed housing cost for yourself. In the long run, it's insurance because after you've paid this premium for a while, the mortgage goes away, and now you have really low, but still, you know, more than zero housing costs because you have to continue to pay taxes, maintenance, and other fees until you die. Housing has a lot of disadvantages, and people don't talk about this. Okay, Silicon Valley, tech industry, a lot of different jobs. The most profitable way, according to an article I read, is to move jobs every 2 years. All right, and you need to move to wherever that next job is, not necessarily down the street. And there's just a lot of career growth and learning that has to happen in an information economy like that. So you have an opportunity cost in terms of jobs that you cannot get anymore once you fix yourself in place with a house here or home, whatever you call it. Yeah, okay. Then if you hold it for a small period of time, realtor fees are like 5%. And on a $300,000 property, that is going to be $15,000. I mean, so you sell, you lose $15,000 immediately. Costs more money to move. And if the market swings, which you can't predict, then you could easily, if you're forced to sell, lose $60,000 on a market swing, which might be all of your equity at that point. So, and especially like when the market swings, you may lose your job, which is exactly the time that you might be forced to sell a home, which is exactly the time when you wouldn't want to be because the market's down, you're getting less money for it. So there are risks and there are expenses. You know, I had a pipe burst in the wall, and the total cost to fix that stuff was like $4,000. You know, just it evaporates. Now I'm lucky that, you know, my HOA covered that particular situation, but other situations involving plumbing would be me because they're within my interior walls. And that's how the rules work. Anyway, if we look at the average returns of housing, even in Silicon Valley, where housing has grown in price by a huge amount, the average returns from home ownership are not nearly as good as if you had invested in the stock market, and I'm going to show you that right now. So this is my neighborhood, okay, and these are inflation-adjusted condo sales for the last 30 years. What I do in my free time, because I'm really boring, is I look up home prices
and I write them down for many different sale instances so I know, exactly how the market has tracked this over time. I do a linear interpolation, so this is kind of the average rise. Okay, and then what I do is I use a compounding annual growth rate to say what growth rate would this have to grow every year to keep up with this line, or to go from $90,000 to the inflation adjusted end price, which I estimated around 160,000, I think. And that should have been 160 because I had to adjust it later. 160. Okay, cool. All right. So you would get, ignoring inflation, about 2% return rate on annual compounding growth rate if you had bought in 1987 and held it to 2017. If you had invested in the S&P 500 instead, you'd get a 7.72% return rate. That's a lot higher than 2%, and that's also inflation adjusted. So, in other words, if you had bought a property for $90,000, then 160, inflation adjusted, you'd have 160 at the end of this. But if you would put $90,000 into the S&P 500, inflation adjusted, you'd have $837,000. So the S&P 500 just totally kills it. And so S&P 500 way, way, way more profitable than investing in housing. Without inflation, let's see. So if we ignore the inflation adjustment, then your investment grows to $1.8 million. And the last condo sale in my neighborhood that matches these one bedroom characteristic or whatever was $550. So point is, the stock market completely crushed the property value returns for this period, and that's not even me including any of the costs of owning something. So there is no doubt that even if there are dramatic rises in the short term, there are also dramatic falls. And since we can't predict on what schedule those are going to happen, we have to take kind of the long-term growth rate, and the long-term growth rate isn't that great. Okie doke. So going back here, so average return's not very good. So if we want to grow net worth, okay, we want to keep money out of the primary residence, and we want to have it growing in stocks because they're going to give us better cash flow. They're going to give us better returns. Primary residence has no cash flow whatsoever that it returns because your primary residence, you're not renting it out. This isn't a rental property, which is a different deal when it comes to investment. So when we're thinking about building net worth, really our goal is to not lose money. So we don't want to lose money paying for housing, whether we're paying it to own something or whether we're paying it in rent. So really our goal is just to spend as little as possible on the housing that we need, and then use the money that we save from that to buy things that grow in value, to start a business, or to educate ourselves so we can do more valuable work and make more money. When you buy a home, you really want to fill it out with nice stuff. Furniture, appliances, stuff. You want to make it yours and personalized, and that also doesn't help with net worth, especially furniture. I knew somebody who paid $25,000 for furniture, just ended up in a ton of debt from that. In the long run, we also want real estate to be about 25% of our total net worth, because we want the other percentages of net worth to diversify into other asset classes so that we're protected against, dramatic changes in any one area of the markets. And in the Bay Area, properties are so expensive that even if someone gives you money to buy the property, it can end up being 80% of your net worth like that, because you simply haven't had enough time to build up the savings and investment to buy enough stock such that $100,000 in a home would be only 25% of your net worth. So I'm not against nice homes. It sounds like I am, but I'm really not against them. However, I am against you doing things that prevent you from reaching your more important big, hairy life goals. Loan officers and realtors do not care about your big, hairy life goals. They care about closing the deal. They care about making their commission. They care about doing some business. I care about you reaching your big, hairy life goals. And from the numbers I can see, home in the Bay Area, other places is a different story. Home in the Bay Area is just going to get in the way of that for all of the salaries that I know. A good thing about a primary residence, and I think this is probably the best thing, is that it's a forced savings plan. But the forced savings plan only works if you're in a mortgage that is, say, at least like 15, like maximum 15 years, or maybe 10 years, a 30-year mortgage, because the savings amount in the mortgage principal payback is significantly lower than the interest payment. It's not a great forced savings plan. And the problem is that everything that you can possibly afford in the Bay Area would require a 30-year mortgage in order to afford it right now. So I like that aspect of primary residence a lot, but it doesn't work very well here because the housing is not cheap enough. This is kind of random. When you look at a home, you want to look at what would you be paying if you had paid everything off. In other words, what's the remaining HOA fee? What's the remaining insurance? What's the remaining tax? Because I'm going to encourage people to buy homes that they can pay off aggressively so they can get to a low fixed housing cost. And it's really nice if you can get that long-term low cost after you've paid it off as small as possible, because that's going to help you with your investment goals, with any business starting goals, with anything else you have going on with money. Last thing I want to point out is some people have done very well either with stock options or whatever it is. And I have, discussed this point number one, primary residence is insurance, not investment. If you have a big invested sum of money, you don't need housing insurance. You're kind of self-insured because that big chunk of money is going to be throwing off some kind of cash flow, and that cash flow can be used to pay for housing if you need it. So that's something to keep in mind. It's just a fact. Most people don't have a giant chunk of money, so don't need to talk about it. I've discussed this before, but variable rate mortgages should be avoided and are unacceptable. We are only interested in fixed rate mortgages. Fixed rate so that we know exactly what the risk is, and we know what the risk is going to be 10 years from now. We know what the payment's going to be. If there is inflation, we will benefit because people who hold debt benefit from inflation. And the more aggressive we get, in other words, the lower the number of years to pay off that mortgage, the interest rate is going to be lower. So we're going to pay less money to the bank, and we're going to get to save more of that money. More of our money is going to be converted into paying down the debt principal, which translates into equity in the home, assuming home values remain constant. 30-year mortgages are renting from the bank. 30-year mortgages are renting from the bank. 30-year mortgages, which 90% of people get, are just renting a home from the bank. And if you want to be an owner, you need to avoid renting from the bank. So get a 15-year or less. Most people are unable to pay off their 30-year mortgages. A lot of people end up moving before 30 years for a wide variety of reasons. And since all the interest is stacked at the beginning of that loan, they don't make any progress building equity. Okay, doke. So I want to say the one thing is that, because as I said before, in the Bay Area, you can't do anything less than a 30-year because the prices are so astronomical. If you can possibly find a situation where if you rented that home, it would give you a good return, but only if you bought it on a 30-year, that might be something to look into in certain situations. Okay? But that return has to be like 8% after accounting for all of the expenses, after accounting for taxes, after accounting for all kinds of stuff. It's called an internal rate of return. You can go look it up. It's a real estate concept. You probably would want to get an accountant to help you with it. That would take away a lot of the risk because even though the place is very expensive, if you need to move, you can turn around and rent it and get a rate of return that is similar to what you would get if you invested in the stock market. This is not true for most homes in the Bay Area. Most homes in the Bay Area will give you a very poor rate of return if you bought them at current market prices and then turned around and tried to rent them. And for that reason, you don't want to deal with the hassle of being a landlord for a low rate of return. You'd rather just buy into the stock market and get the returns with no effort that are generally higher, like I've shown you before. Next point. Historically, the average for home prices has been about 2.2 times an annual gross income. Okay, that figure is more like 3 now nationally, and the Bay Area is much more. It's like 4 or 5 or something in that range. Depends upon what your income is, what area you're in, all that kind of thing. And that's like the minimum house, that's like the cheapest stuff. So what I'm going to tell you is go for a low ratio. Okay? Get it less than, 2.2. Get it, mine was 1.5 when I bought my condo. And I did that very intentionally because I knew that I didn't want all this money tied up in a home. I was very lucky that the housing market dropped right when it was a good time for me to think about using money that way. And obviously not everybody has that opportunity. Different states, it's more possible. I totally respect that. That's why I said in the Bay Area, rent, do not own. But if you are somewhere else that has cheaper homes, okay, and you can find a condo instead of a house, and the condo is only 1.5 times your income, that is a great deal because you can pay that off very quickly. The numbers and ratios make sense. You can pay it off quickly, and then for your next property, you can trade up in cash, or if the rental return rate on that is good, then you could rent it out and then use that additional cash flow to help you buy another, maybe a little more expensive property, but hopefully I think you would just sell the property and then always trade up and just buy properties with cash and make that your mode of operation. Because again, your primary residence is insurance, not an investment. And we want to be paying as little for insurance as possible, which means we don't want to be paying interest to the bank. All right, so I've been talking about, the cost of the entire home compared to your gross income. And I've talked about that you want real estate to be 25% of your net worth in the long run. It's going to be more than that. If you buy a house, in your 20s, it's probably going to be closer to 40%. But you can pay it down. And you can, invest until you get to, a better ratio. It's really invest until you get into a better ratio. Now I'm going to talk about how much of your take-home pay should you be spending on this housing stuff. Dave Ramsey's recommendation is to pay 25% or less of your take-home pay on housing. That includes rent. That includes, rent if you're renting, or if you've bought a home, it includes the mortgage, which is principal and interest, any homeowners association dues, property taxes. I include maintenance in here. I don't know if he does. Maintenance is estimated about 1% of the home value, and whatever the home insurance is. So all of that added together, I think there's an acronym like TIPS. You can look it up. Should be less than 25% of your take-home pay. Again, in the Bay Area, this is super challenging. This is pretty much impossible. But, if you're in an area where you get a place that's 1.5x and you're getting it on something like a 15-year or less, then you can hit this 25% number. And then you can pay it off quickly and trade up with cash for the rest of your life. And that's going to save you a ton of money. Random next point. Never buy a home with someone unless you are married. It turns into a legal nightmare. If you break up, one person loses their job, doesn't want to pay, moves away. Now you're stuck with all these legal problems associated with a home going into default. You don't want to mess with it. Never buy a home with someone unless you are married. Legally speaking, the situation with married couples has a lot of precedence and is already worked out. The situation with unmarried persons is a lot more not determined. Unless you come with a very detailed contract beforehand, it turns into a nightmare. So keep it simple. Do not buy a home with anyone unless you are married to them. When you do look at buying a home, location, 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 it's been said before, but it's super true. That's going to determine the school system. That's going to matter to a lot of people. Furthermore, systematically, how a property fits into your lifestyle, your wealth building lifestyle, is going to have a big impact on things. Is this home near healthy food? Can you walk to get your groceries? Is this home near fun-free activities that are going to distract you from doing things that cost money? And here's the thing. If you have a really big party once or twice a year, you could rent a venue that would hold more people. And so you don't need to pay all that money for a large place that you're only going to use a couple times a year for a big party. And if, there's a certain place that you like to be at, like by the beach or something, you can rent Airbnbs for special trips every year to go to that. But when you buy a home, the payment's stuck in place, and it's physically stuck in place. So yes, there are ways that, there are things that you want to be true about the location, and there are things that you want to be true about the other properties in that location. You don't want the most expensive house in the neighborhood because people looking for a house like that typically aren't going to go to that kind of neighborhood. Your appreciation is going to be as good as it can be if you buy things that are at the bottom of the market. That doesn't mean, and I don't mean like by bottom of the market, I don't mean if you purchase any ramshackle, bad condition place. I don't recommend people buy bad condition places unless they're contractors who know how to fix this stuff up. What I mean is that the more affordable your property is relative to all the houses around it, the more people are going to be able to pay for it and are going to be attracted to it. So it's easier to resell. So spend a lot of time studying the location. There are crime report maps you can look up, assaults, things like that, public transportation, and so on. All right, next concept I want to talk about is the debt to income ratio. If you get a mortgage, if you get a home loan, they're going to pay attention to your debt to income ratio as a means of evaluating your ability to repay that loan. Okay? Typically, they look for the mortgage payment or all the costs of the house, including the HOA fee and other things, to be less than 28% of your gross income. That's your income before taxes. I think that's crazy. If you applied that to me, that means they would qualify me to pay 44% of my income for housing. That is insane. No doubt in San Jose, there are a lot of people paying more than 40% for housing. But it's a dumb idea. There are a lot of people, burdened with housing in San Jose. The official definition of being housing burdened is something like, greater than 30%. That was from a 1937 National Housing Act government housing program. That's insane. So again, before I said I said you need to be paying 25% of your take-home pay. That's even less than 25% of your gross pay. So this number that you can qualify for to get a loan is stupid high, and tons of people follow it as an affordability guideline. It is not an affordability guideline. Maybe you can keep your head above water paying this, but we don't want to just keep our head above water. We want to actually be able to pay for our retirement. We actually want to be able to build some wealth and do something with our life. So when you hear this 28% number or 30% number, debt to income ratio, from a loan officer, from something you read online, it is dumb. Don't pay attention to it. 25% of take-home pay or less, that's what you want to think about getting when you purchase a house. And I said this from the 1960s? No, it's from 1937. I had to do a little bit of historical research to get this kind of more accurate thing. So it's bumped around a little bit. They said 30%, and then they dropped it to 20%, and they popped it back up to 25%, and now we finally landed on 28%. It's pretty arbitrary. So this 28% is a piece of crap. The other thing you have to do to qualify for home loan is they want to see that all of your debts, all of your fixed debt payments are less than 36% of your gross annual income. That's just a fact. So now you know. Yep, and I've got links here. I will link to this spreadsheet in the description so you can read these articles yourself. I have come to the conclusion that, this 25% of take-home pay guideline, I think it's a good guideline, so I will repeat it, and it's way better than what most people are doing. But my opinion is, if you want to be wealthy and not just hit the bare minimums of paying for your retirement, paying for your healthcare later in life, and not being freaked out by being, underwater all the time, then you will aim for less than 20% of your take-home pay being spent on housing. And that's going to give you the flexibility over time to do these things that you need to do and make these changes that you need to make to continue pursuing financial independence. So less than 20%, that's the zone of wealth, my opinion. Less than 10%, that's the zone of extreme wealth, early retirement. And this is the, Dave Ramsey 25%. So, seeing this graphic helps you remember that number. Fantastic. A quarter of the pie, 25% of take-home pay, that's what you want to think about. Wealthy, 20%. If you can do 20% on housing and you can do 50% of your take-home pay invested, set aside, saved, starting a business, you've got 30% left over for everything else. And this investment, you can include the retirement percentage in there. That's fine. It's all investment. This is like, roughly speaking, it's almost inevitable you're going to be wealthy, if you arrange things like that. And getting the housing costs down is a big part of being able to achieve this, because this is oftentimes fixed for 12-month periods or long periods of time. And it's harder to move sometimes. You can cut back here, you can drop the cable and all that stuff. You can not go on the super fancy vacation this year. But this is, harder to budge unless you are intentional during one of those housing transition points about setting yourself up this way. And it's an unusual way. Most people are spending a lot more than this. So you have to intentionally say, I want cheap housing. I think it's really beautiful. It would make my heart really glad if I lived somewhere that would make other people sad. Okay. And again, really wealthy, 10% or less on housing. This is super hard to get to. I mean, even with the place completely paid off that I bought at the bottom of the market, I'm still at I want to say 7%. So you can get to this. So actually, roommates will get you here. If you can get a cheap place and then stack it up with some like-minded roommates, that will get you here. And so now if you already know your personality, it's a more extreme personality, and you're just like, I want to get this done. I'm so excited. I'm so excited about controlling my own time and doing these things I'm passionate about that screw housing. We'll make it work. 10% is what you want to, constantly aim for. Cool. All right. And so I want to show you what my behavior has been since I graduated from college, because generally speaking, even before I got obsessed with personal finance, I was sensitive to the fixed cost of housing. I just had chosen it in my brain as something that I wanted to pay more attention to. So I calculated what my percentage that I've paid for housing over the years is, and I'm going to discuss a little bit about what I was thinking about and how I made that work. So we've got 3 lines here, a little bit complicated. 2 of the lines. So first off, the yellow line, that represents my relative income since I graduated from college. So obviously, these numbers here, those are percentage numbers. So this doesn't, there's no number on here that represents what my income is. But this is just, relatively speaking, on the same scale, how much did my income increase, which can kind of show you how much do income increases, take-home pay increases, account for my falling rent to income ratio. Okay, so I'm using rent to income here because rent to income, rent is like the lost money, and income is just take-home pay. I've been saying before that you want the total cost of housing to be 25% or less. I'm including in that the principal payment on a mortgage. And the principal payment on a mortgage matters. And if you're doing the mortgage properly, the principal payment is going to be a substantial part of it. If you're on a quick paydown plan, then I guess the more important thing to look at, or at the end of the day, after everything is done, the most important thing to look at is your fixed losses on housing. Because in theory, that principal is building equity that you would be able to get back later, and that grows, 2% per year plus inflation or whatever that number was. So that's some little bit of explanation here about why this says rent instead of housing costs. They're a little bit different. Okay, so the yellow line will kind of give you an idea of how much do increases in income contribute to my lowering rent to housing cost ratio. And the red line is the relative rent. So what the red line means is basically what was my cost of housing. I started at, again, in that Berkeley apartment, so this would be about $500. And I think now I'm at about $550 since I've got everything paid off. So it's increased a little bit, but I kind of come full circle, and I've come back to the same fixed loss amount that I was at when I graduated college. So this is how it's gone for me. All right. I lived in Berkeley, and then I moved to San Francisco, and that substantially increased my housing cost. Okay. And this was the beginning of my career. So I wasn't making that much money yet when I moved to San Francisco, and therefore the ratio of rent to income substantially increased. And here I am at, close to, 28%, close to 30%. This is like, I guess young, dumb kid. So, I work hard, and I get a pay increase, and I don't upgrade my housing after the pay increase. So the pay increase causes this ratio to go down, and so now I'm getting closer to 20, where I need to be. Then I had to move in San Francisco, and the next place cost me a little more than the previous place, so I jumped back up. This made me uncomfortable. This was about $1,300, and that was making me uncomfortable because I just had a thing where it's like anything above $1,000 emotionally pains me. So I decided to pursue buying the condo. I moved out preemptively, assuming that the condo would close. The condo took 5 months to close. So I moved out after 6 months living in this more expensive place. I moved and I lived on a mattress on a floor in Menlo Park for a summer. So that dropped me down to, I think I was paying $700 or $750. Then the condo closed. And so, I went and lived in the condo, and I got just above 20% with the cost of, living in the condo with a 30-year mortgage at that point, right? Then, I was able to upgrade my career some, so that brings the ratio down because I continue living in the condo, paying the same amount, but salary is increasing, okay? And so this huge drop right here, that's girlfriend is moving in. So roommates, huge improvement on this ratio. Roommates are good. Roommates are helping us. So, we continue living there together. And at this point, I refinanced. And when I refinanced, that dropped my interest payment substantially because I started at a 5.8% interest rate, and now I'm at 3.1. So this little dip here, that's interest rate refinancing helping me. But sadly, relationship ends, break up. So now I'm paying everything myself again. The loss goes up because now I have to cover everything. And then, I continue paying on the mortgage, and eventually I pay off the mortgage. That gets rid of essentially just that interest payment, which at this point, the interest payment, I think the after the refinance, my fixed housing losses were on $750 a month, $800 a month. And then once that interest was gone, then it dropped down to about $550. So, now here I am at the very end of the day. Look, no doubt, I was lucky to have the opportunity to buy something when I could. But I also didn't get starry-eyed by the gains in salary that I had over time and change my housing situation. I've been here for 9 years, I guess. Yeah, about 9 years, a little bit less, maybe 8.5. Anyway, so yeah, I think it's a great exercise if people graph this out for themselves, if only to understand where you're at and where you've been thinking over time and what's been influencing this financial aspect on your life. I find it very helpful for me to kind of turn my life story into these graphs so I can connect events that occur with what's going on with me financially. Okie doke. Okay, so yeah, less than 20% zone of wealth, less than 10% zone of extreme wealth. Going to leave these articles here to see how badly people are doing in the Bay Area with this. The winning strategy in the Bay Area is to work really hard, upgrade yourself through the tech path, the medicine path, or whatever you can, and then pick something that is weird in terms of housing, and that's how it works out here. That's the winning plan. So down payment. How much down payment should you have? Well, if you have less than 20% for down payment, they're going to charge you something called private mortgage insurance. It's about $75 a month for every extra $100,000 per $100,000 borrowed. Actually, that's what it is. $75 a month per $100,000 borrowed. Private mortgage insurance is a bummer to pay. If you can pay down the mortgage to where it's 78% of the original appraised value, you can get rid of it. You can request that your mortgage company stop charging you for private mortgage insurance, because at that point, what is private mortgage insurance? It is insurance in case you default on your loan. It's insurance that protects your lender, not you, against your default. So the private mortgage insurance company will pay your lender in case you stop paying your loan payment. So you don't want it. So if you can get that 20%, do it. But some deals are so good. And again, you have to measure the goodness of the deal by your ability to afford the payment for it, your ability to rent out the property. If you can't make the payment, the value of other homes in the area. But some deals will be so good that I would say, yeah, go ahead and make the 10% down payment. Just purchase that property. Make it happen. There's not very many of those deals. I look a lot, and I just haven't found anything in the last few years. It's super hard out here. So that's the deal with down payment and private mortgage insurance and all that. 20% is a good amount to aim for anywhere else in the country that has, more affordable homes. And of course, the down payment, you have to look at that also in terms of how much equity do you get after the down payment and what percentage of your net worth is that. Because you don't want to pay too much of your net worth into a down payment and then be too heavy in real estate, if you can avoid it. Say no to down payment assistance programs. They say these are helpful in the Bay Area. Most housing assistance stuff in the Bay Area is not helpful for net worth. It's helpful getting people into homes they can't really afford. It's not helpful for net worth. I'm very depressed by the housing assistance programs that I've seen in the Bay Area. They typically saddle people who don't make enough money with fixed housing costs that are very high and will prevent them from growing wealthy. And I think that's a shame and terrible. They just seem political to me more than like a thoughtful analysis of the numbers. Really, the only way to game them is if you make like $50,000 and you know you're going to make $120,000. You're just kind of intentionally under earning. Then you can get into some of those below market rate units, and then your income increases and you're still living in a below market rate unit. That's not terrible, but the below market rate units, you don't get to keep any of the housing appreciation that happens over time. So yeah, it's good insurance because you save on housing costs, and typically you wouldn't be able to rent the same type of thing for anywhere near the same price. So maybe you get a little bit of lifestyle there, but there's a lot of other parts about it that are kind of nasty and that I don't like. So I typically avoid all the housing assistant government programs out here. They suck. All right, let's just go through some general housing terms, and hopefully you'll know kind of what people are talking about later when you look into this stuff. An inspection is going to be someone looking through the property and figuring out all the stuff that's wrong, so that the owner or the seller can fix things or say they're not going to fix things. and so that after you purchase the property, you don't end up with a big headache because you have a terrible water problem, foundation problem, something like that. Title insurance is part of your closing process. This is insurance. It's different from private mortgage insurance, and home insurance is a different type of insurance. It's insurance on the title, which means that if someone sold you the home but they didn't actually own it, so technically they can't sell it to you, so now you have a legal problem because you might not technically be able to own it, then title insurance says, oh, we screwed up in our research about the background of this property. We will reimburse you for the cost of the property, and you don't have to worry about that stuff. Buying a home is a really big risk because it's like the biggest purchase most people ever make. So title insurance helps to protect you against messed up legal situations involving the ownership and legality of the property. An appraisal is the appraised value of the home. It's typically based on nearby sales. Depending upon what's sold nearby recently, it can make a lot of sense or no sense at all. And a lot of times the appraisal comes in to happen, to match the sale price of the home or the proposed sales price of the home. Funny how that works. That's exactly what happened to me when I bought the condo. Surprise, surprise. It's really, I want to say it's more art than science, but honestly, it's a lot of bullshit sometimes. People really want to make the appraisal match the sales price so they can get the deal done. And so, during the 2008 housing stuff, there was a lot of kind of appraisal fudging, fraud. They're going to charge you $400 for appraisal. You have a right to see it because you pay $400 for it. I'm not sure how much faith I would put in it, but it's a fact that you have to get one in order to close on those loans. Short sale. So a short sale is what you do to avoid a foreclosure. It's when you are behind on your payments and you are underwater and you want to dump this problem. Some lenders would prefer a short sale to a foreclosure because the foreclosure is going to cost them money in legal fees when they do the legal procedure to take that property from you. The short sale is where you sell your underwater property to someone else for less money than you owe on the loan. And if the lender will approve that, and perhaps there's even a private mortgage insurance company that will reimburse the lender because you've essentially defaulted, then the lender would prefer that scenario to foreclosure, which could, when you add everything together, cost them more money in a market where they really can't turn around and sell it anyway. So short sales can be good ideas, can be good deals. Sometimes they're not good deals. Foreclosures, that's the step after short sale. They sometimes can be good deals. Sometimes they're not good deals. My short sale took 5 months to close, whereas a normal housing deal will typically take more like 30 days to close. So you've got to have patience for a short sale, and you've really got to understand why the property is being short sold. What are the motivations of the lender? What are the motivations of the seller? What your requirements are? How are you going to fit into the process? And so on. It's not a silver bullet to purchase a short sale or a foreclosure, but they can be good because they're weird, and a lot of buyers might avoid them because they're weird. I'm going to drink some tea. That's delicious. I would want to eat a cookie, but I'm afraid it'll slow down my talking, and I need to get done with this. A HELOC, a home equity line of credit. That's where you can borrow money on your home like a credit card. This is what got people into trouble during the housing crash because it increases the total amount of debt that you owe. Do not open a home equity line of credit. Do not play games with a home equity line of credit. You will never take out a HELOC if you follow my advice. It's a terrible thing. That's what it is. I've already discussed private mortgage insurance. It is insurance you pay to protect the lender against your own default. And home insurance is insurance that you pay to cover problems that happen with your home. If you own a house, this insurance typically will cover the exterior and the interior of the house. If you own a condo, many times your homeowners association fee will cover exterior maintenance, exterior problems, and typically your insurance policy will be walls in. It will cover the cost of your possessions and things within the condo. So having low housing cost, I've told you that I think housing can make you wealthy, but I've also told you that housing is insurance, and insurance typically protects against loss. It does not make you wealthy. So what do I mean when I say that housing can make you wealthy, incredibly wealthy, amazingly wealthy? Well, because housing plays an integral role in your whole life, and when you develop a life plan to build net worth, housing plays a central component of that. When you choose affordable, cheap housing, not only are you saving money because you're not spending on housing, but you're also not like coveting your home as this amazing jeweled castle that you need to build up and spend more money on. So now you're not spending money on really fancy appliances. You're not spending money on fancy furniture. You're not spending money redecorating or remodeling or all that other stuff. And so you have more of this money that you would otherwise feel compelled to spend on this lifestyle stuff that you can now invest and put towards your long-term big hairy goal. When your housing cost, which is usually your largest cost, is low, your emergency fund doesn't need to be as big. When your emergency fund can be smaller, not only do you have one, but also that frees up more of your net worth to invest in assets with a greater return that don't need the same kind of stability that your emergency fund needs. All right? Smaller homes are typically cheaper homes, and they need less cleaning and less maintenance, which means you're not spending your time cleaning and maintaining a home. You're spending your time on pleasurable activities or net worth building activities or planning activities or networking activities that help you build the net worth because you understand more about what other people are doing and how you can interact with them to be economically productive. There's also a huge emotional side that is relevant for this equation. When you have a lot of invested wealth and you look at your neighbors, typically most of them are doing the wrong thing. So for them, that similar home is like most of their net worth, and they may be even payment burdened by quite a bit. You're going to think to yourself, wow, I'm doing really well. And when you think you're doing really well, you feel less compelled to prove that you are doing really well by buying crap to make you feel better about the money that you make and how hard you're working. And this emotional component is huge. As I've said before, housing is a big part of identity. And if you have intentionally picked cheaper housing in order to build net worth, you're going to be surrounded by a reminder every day of the decisions that you're making in order to complete your goal. And that's going to keep you more focused on the goal, on building the net worth, taking care of business, and focusing your time and energy on the big things in your life, passion projects, whatever you want to call them, that are going to give you a greater amount of fulfillment. Okay, so these points were actually for the emergency fund, just to make that clear. This is a little out of order. Came up with this pretty quickly. Okay. At the end of the day, my strategy for housing means that you are converting what is generally a money problem. How do I afford housing? What kind of loan do I get? How long will it take me to pay it off? I'm telling you to go really cheap on this. And I don't mean cheap as in like buy something that is intentionally unpleasant. I just mean buy it in terms of like it's easy for you to handle all these payments and get the thing paid off. It turns housing into a from a numbers problem into an emotional problem, because now you're going to be looking at your friends' houses and they may have bought much more house than you. And you're always going to think, or until you look at it enough, you're going to think, I could have such a bigger house. And that would be so cool. There's all these things I could be doing if I actually had a bigger house. You can imagine them, but a lot of times they don't actually end up being true because, yeah, you're actually spending your time somewhere else or doing something else. And so for a lot of people, buying a home, purchasing a home they're like, how am I ever going to purchase a home? And I'm trying to bring that problem from this, how do I get enough money to do this, to I have enough money to do this, and I have enough money to pay it off and to make this work and trade up for cash. But now I need to work on my psychology game in terms of remaining satisfied in a huge area of consumption, because it's typically your biggest purchase, where you are conspicuously under-consuming. Because again, there's this Diderot effect where when we conspicuously under-consume, we're a little uncomfortable about it, we're a little bit uneasy about it. And so now we need to put effort into working on that. And I can talk more about that later. This is the end of the video. I'd welcome your comments, and I hope you've enjoyed my point of view on housing. Have a good night.